It's an honor to do this introduction to my life work of 40 years, and it's a pleasure to do it with AANE. I've attended a number of your conferences, and I look forward to doing this and other things in the future. So I'm titling this Undue Influence, Cults and Predators, and the terminology of undue influence is really a legal term for somebody exploiting somebody else. And there are destructive cults, but then there are also controlling people. And so my hope today in this webinar is to give everyone a summary of some of the most important ideas and concepts. And I do welcome questions and interaction as we go through this presentation. And the first question I guess I want everyone to take a moment to think about is, how would you know if someone is under mind control, or if you were under mind control? And I can tell you that when I was involved with a cult myself, which is how I got interested in this subject, and I'm going to show you a picture of the former cult leader and his wife, Sun Myung Moon and Hak Jahan. I didn't believe I was under mind control. I was sure, in fact, that I was doing God's will, that the whole world was brainwashed, but I wasn't. I thought the end of the world was coming in World War III. That Moon was the greatest man in human history, 10 times greater than Jesus or Moses or Buddha or Muhammad or anybody. And my entire family and friends freaked out. This was 1974, because I was such a neurotypical, super, independent person who didn't like to join anything. I was very introverted. And I dropped out of college, quit my job, donated my bank accounts, cut off contact with my family and friends, took all my poetry. I was a creative writing major in college and threw it out. And everyone didn't know how to even talk to me and connect with me and such. So the question, this is a really important question, and it's complex, the answer, but the information you need will be contained in the presentation tonight. And I'm certainly welcoming anyone if you want to take a stab at this question, if you want to type in, or and Joanne can read it, the answers to other people. The core of my work is really about empowering people to think for themselves and make their own decisions. So the locus of control for people's lives is within themselves, and not always deferring to some external authority. And the takeaway of this slide is really that everybody is vulnerable to undue influence in one shape or form over a series of life cycle events that can happen. These are a few pictures of a mass wedding that my former cult leader and his wife performed. All the people in these images are true believing followers. The women are wearing identical wedding dresses and the men wearing identical suits. And essentially Moon would say, you and you, you and you, and you'd have 5 minutes to decide if you wanted to accept God's choice for you. And the commitment was expected to be absolutely total. As I was involved with the group, I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night. I had moved into one of their centers. I was assigned a buddy, a senior person who went with me everywhere and oversaw my work. And so this slide, I talk about how know, I thought I was operating of my own free choice, but I wasn't. I thought I was thinking independently. I wasn't. And I was living in a bubble, a mind-control bubble, and I needed ultimately help to exit that situation. That happened 2.5 years later for me. And so I want to just talk about a continuum of influence. I'll shoot ahead to this slide of constructive, healthy influence and destructive, unhealthy influence. And for me, thinking about influence on a continuum makes just a lot of sense, because everything about life is influence, it seems. But in terms of healthy influence, the respect for your individuality and your authentic being, and where there's love that's based on your beingness, as opposed to on the destructive side, a false identity that's in the image of the cult leader, and where love is conditional upon good performance, and that if you don't do what the leader tells you to do, bad things are going to happen to you. You'll never be a good person. On the healthy side, conscience is very, very respected, whereas on the destructive end of this influence continuum, the dogma or the doctrine is what is. On the healthy side, creativity, humor, again, individuality, free will, critical thinking. And on the destructive side, fear, guilt, dependency, obedience to this false self in the image of the leader. So this is my influence continuum slide. It's in the updated edition of my 1988 book called Combating Cult Mind Control. And there are 2 more slides that we made that are in the new edition, one for leaders and one for groups and relationships. And we'll cover the leaders next. And the healthy side, legitimate healthy leaders are healthy psychologically. They are human beings. They don't claim to be perfect. They don't claim to know everything. They know their own limits. They help to empower other people and individuals in their spheres. They're trustworthy. They're accountable. They're responsible. Whereas on the unhealthy continuum, people are very self-absorbed, narcissistic, psychopathic, very grandiose, elitist, wanting to control people, power-hungry, secretive, deceptive, and basically say, I'm smarter than everyone, I know everything, and you need to just submit and obey me. And on the influence continuum for groups and relationships, and when I talk about relationships, I'm talking about, on the unhealthy side, controlling relationships, where a man takes over his partner or a woman takes over their partner and makes them dependent and obedient on them as an individual. But in terms of the healthy and the unhealthy continuum, the healthy continuum of groups allows checks and balances, and also encourages informed consent so that you know what you're getting involved with. And there's checks and balances on power, where your individuality is respected, but there's also diversity. And what I mean by means creating the ends, I mean that in the healthy sphere, if you're doing good things in an ethical way, you're going to get a good result, as opposed to the dark side, where they often believe the ends justify the means. And yes, we need to lie, and we need to trick, and we need to steal, but later we'll have a beautiful, wonderful world or country. The healthy side encourages growth and most importantly, freedom to leave a relationship or an organization. But on the other side, the destructive side, it's very authoritarian, very deceptive and manipulative. They really want to make people over in the image of the cult leader. They really just care about their own power and money and grandiosity, and there's never a legitimate reason to leave. And then we have the next slide is really talking about the difference between overt brainwashing versus the more subtle, sophisticated undue influence. And for me, for example, the kidnapping of Patricia Hearst, who was an heiress who was kidnapped out of her apartment, and she was put in a closet and raped and turned into Tanya of the cult group Simeonese Liberation Army. This was around the same time that I was recruited into the Mooney cult, by the way. That was a more clear example of overt brainwashing, where initially she didn't want to be kidnapped, she didn't want to be imprisoned or raped, but the compliance, what sometimes is referred to as Stockholm Syndrome, takes over. And it can also create false confessions and compliant behavior with overt brainwashing. Undue influence, though, the kind of experience I had, there really is the illusion of choice and the illusion of control, where you feel like things are voluntary and that the new identity is created out of an evolution or a growth, but in fact it's manipulation. The next slide, really, I want to talk about the most important concept in social psychology. It's called the fundamental attribution error. And in my work helping counsel people who've been involved with destructive cults and mind control, helping them to get better, in my work coaching family members and friends how to rescue a loved one who have undergone a radical personality change, I typically show different social psychology experiments, some videos of these experiments. For example, the Solomon Asch conformity study, or the Stanley Milgram obedience study, or the Philip Zimbardo prison study. And the essence of understanding the error that the world makes when they're trying to look at why is this human being doing what they're doing is they tend to over-attribute personal variables or personality variables, and they underestimate deception and social influence variables, the contextual variables. So talking about myself, why did Steve Hassan drop out of Queens College and become a Mooney? Oh, he must have been looking for something, or he must have been weak, or he must have come from a bad family, or something wrong with Steve, which, you know, at the bottom of the slide, it talks about victim blaming. Instead of Steve was, his girlfriend dumped him, and he was at this cafeteria at Queens College, and 3 women pretending to be students were flirting with him and love bombing him and inviting him over for a free dinner, and lied to him and incrementally influenced him to get more and more involved and plant ideas in his head. So that's what fundamental attribution error is about. Another very important concept is cognitive dissonance theory. This is a picture of Leon Festinger, who wrote a very famous book called When Prophecies Fail in the 50s, about a UFO cult, actually, where the woman predicted that a spaceship was going to come to a particular mountain on a particular evening. And common sense would say that if the spaceship didn't show up, people would get disillusioned and leave the group. But he studied this group, and he saw that people actually believed more after going up to the mountainside as opposed to less. And so he created this theory saying that we basically have thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and that if we change any one of the 3, the other 2 will shift to reduce dissonance. And if you can get someone to do an extreme behavior, like go up to a mountain top late at night, it's going to cause you to believe more in the reason for why you went up and feel passionate about it as well. So that's cognitive dissonance theory. The next important concept I'd like to get to, I hope I'm not going too fast for everybody, I know this is a lot of material, is the notion that mind control creates this dissociative disorder, this split between your authentic self and the cult self. It doesn't erase who you are, and it just suppresses it. And if you've had the misfortune of being born into a destructive cult, even people born in cult groups still have an authentic self. It's just that they don't have the rich opportunity, environmental nurturance to develop themselves until after they get out of the destructive cult. So the three takeaways I'd like to comment on at this moment is just that a group should not be considered to be a cult just because it's strange or unorthodox or it has weird beliefs. That you should really look at specific behaviors and concrete ways of understanding undue influence. And we've already looked a little bit at the continuum and some of the characteristics on both sides. And then learning about different models and theories can help avoid you being a victim or help prevent someone that you love from getting recruited and victimized by undue influence. So this slide is about a very famous psychiatrist named Robert J. Lifton. He was an Air Force psychiatrist in the 50s, and he was studying Chinese communist brainwashing. And this is an updated edition of his initial book. And in this book, he talked about 8 criteria that any environment may be judged as a brainwashing environment. And in my deprogramming, which followed me falling asleep at the wheel of a van in Baltimore, Maryland, and crashing and needing to be hospitalized, I reached out to my sister, and she arranged with my parents to do an intervention with me, a deprogramming intervention. And it was this book that was used by the ex-Moonies that were helping me to help me have a touchstone to answer the question, how would I know if I was under mind control? Because I didn't think I was under mind control at the time, as I mentioned, but I was very willing to learn about Chinese communist brainwashing and Chinese communist mind control. So as they went through these 8 criteria, it became really obvious to me that the group that I was in, the Unification Church or the Unified Family, were doing all of these 8 things. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of these because I have a lot more slides to get through. But I go into it in detail, and the appendix of this book is his work. I also have some video interviews that I've done with Dr. Lifton, who's still alive, thank goodness, and a seminal figure in the work. Margaret Singer was an army psychologist in the 50s studying Chinese communist brainwashing, and I actually asked her to write the foreword to this edition that came out in 1988, and I included it in the new 2015 one. And as Lifton had his 8 criteria, Margaret Singer had her model for understanding a mind control group. And I'll just go through them quickly, but she talks about gaining control over a person's time and creating a sense of powerlessness, fear, and dependency in them, and using rewards and punishments to reinforce the cult desired behaviors and to punish the non-cult desired things, creating a total tightly controlled system of logic where you can't dissent, you can't ask questions and criticize it, and if you do, you're always made to feel like there's something wrong with you. And always keep people unaware and uninformed that there is an agenda to control them and change them. And she correctly says that thought reform is impossible when a person is functioning at full capacity with informed consent. So I'd like to take a moment and just ask, any questions so far? Any thoughts? I wonder if anyone has had an experience with a destructive cult that you'd like to share, or any specific questions you'd like to ask so far before I continue with the slides.
So there's one question so far that's come in, and that is from a parent saying that they suspect their child is in a cult, and they're wondering what they can do to help him without creating a tense relationship with them.
Good question. So we need to do a whole nother webinar on that, but very briefly to respond, you want to educate yourselves more about what is a cult, what is mind control and such. And what you don't want to do is ultimatums or say to the person, you're in a cult, you're under mind control, because typically if they are, they're going to report it to people inside the group, and then they're going to program the person more not to trust the family, and it will result in a polarization effect. So what I recommend with family members is to always have communication, always stay connected, ask curious questions, almost act like you're interested in joining from that point of view. And there are universals about destructive mind control. And what I found is that the Achilles heel, if I'm trying to help someone out of the Moonies, for example, I won't criticize Moon or the doctrine or the group. I'll talk with them about the Jehovah's Witnesses, or I'll talk with them about the Mormons, or I'll talk with them about Scientology, and then use a different group that they would agree is a destructive group, go through what I'm about to present, the BITE model, and further things, and lay a foundation in their mind to help reality test their own experience. So before I go on, I'll just summarize and say, don't tell them you're in a cult, get out. Don't say get out or else we're going to cut you off and write you out of our well. Don't do ultimatums. Say I love you and tell them if something is legitimate, we'll stand up to scrutiny, and tell them to take time out from going to meetings all the time or doing rituals with the group. I have counseled people involved with terroristic groups, with online groups as well. But you have to be careful. And then, of course, if they found out you've already told them that you think that they're in a cult and they're already suspicious of you, then it becomes an issue of doing things to reconnect to their pre-cult self, to build that rapport again with them. So let's go on.
Steve, we actually have one more question that just came in.
Okay, great.
And this is from an educator. The question is, they work with high-functioning autistic young adults, and they have a student who has a history of giving money to individuals that they create relationships with online. And so the question is, what identifies, if any are present, and that could serve as a signal to their student to then close that relationship? What should they be looking for?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. They have a student who gives money to strangers without researching who they are?
Yes, it sounds as though they create the relationship online, and then they donate money to that person. And so this teacher is wondering what type of signals they should be looking for to know if this is a singular person or a cult.
So I spoke with a woman recently who was on the spectrum who told me about how she accepted some new friends online, and these people then started saying how beautiful she was and how they wanted to marry her, and then proceeded to talk about how their family members needed operations and they needed her to send them money. And fortunately, she realized this is weird. I don't know who this person is, and blocked them online. But in general, where we really want to teach people to assess and be good critical thinkers and assess who is this person. And if you only know them online, in my opinion, you shouldn't be donating any money to any strange person. If you like to do philanthropy, then give money to a nonprofit that's, you know, where the money is spent, where there's real accountability and such.
Okay, thank you.
That's my immediate, you know, off the top reaction to that question. So based on Lifton's model is 8 criteria and Margaret Singer's, and based on the cognitive dissonance model of Leon Festinger, remember he talked about thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. I thought about thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and I added information control, and I created what is now referred to as the BITE model of mind control. So the B for the BITE model stands for behavior control. Now, we're talking about specific things to be careful about. And if you go back to the earlier slide, the video of the continuum, which is on my website, I might add, and in my book as well, and on some blogs as well, you really want to be concerned the more a group wants to control your where you live, who you associate with, how you dress, what you eat and drink, your sleep, because a lot of cults like to use sleep deprivation, keeping people up late at night on computers, in chat rooms, on YouTubes, etc. They really want to control money. They really don't want you to have leisure time. They want to control all of your time. And of course also with whom and how you have sex. They want you to do cult rituals, especially religious/spiritual cults. Will have you chanting or praying or meditating for many, many hours, and to do it in such a way that makes you less able to be critical of the leader, the doctrine of the group. Unhealthy behavior control is where you have to ask permission for major life decisions, where you have to report thoughts and feelings, and there are these rigid rules and regulations. So with BITE model, and there's a much longer list, by the way, of the BITE model that's available for you. I just wanted to pick a few highlights for this course. But they really do use behavior modification. They really don't want you to be an individual. The key of behavior control is they want you to do what they tell you to do, period. So that's the behavior control of the BITE model. Information control. My assistant Abigail came up with this picture, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's actually a cockroach inside of this ice cream sundae, and she grew up in the Mormon church, LDS, of Latter-day Saints. But this is a way of programming people inside the group not to look at movies and other fun things, because it's going to poison you, and it's got this horrible taint. So with information control, there's no informed consent. They don't tell you in the beginning who they are, what they believe, and what they're going to ask of you once you make a commitment to the organization. So people may say, I've joined this church or I've joined this group, but if you look at it from the outside, they didn't even know what they were joining. It was systematic manipulation and deception. Another thing with destructive cults is that whatever you say or do can be reported to the leadership in order to manipulate. So people have to turn in each other and spy on each other. There's extensive propaganda. Former members are terrible. Critics are terrible. Don't listen to them. It's spiritual pornography. No other critical points of view. And there's a distinct difference between what the inside believes and what they tell about their group's beliefs to the public. So that's what I mean by insider and outsider doctrines. Any questions so far on the B or the I, the behavior control or the information control? Information is the tool we use to think. So if we're operating in an information silo and we have an us versus them kind of mentality, we can get into a lot of trouble. And that's the T of the BITE model is thought control. It's kind of black and white, us versus them, good, we're good, they're evil. Don't think negative thoughts, just believe magically and good things will happen. Loaded language is one of Lifton's 8 criteria. It talks about words that are jargon, that don't really mean anything to the average person, but within the cult, it has special meaning. So Scientology is one of the worst transgressors of loaded language. They literally have their own dictionaries of terms that Hubbard came up with. And members were taught that if you have a confusion or a doubt or you don't understand something or you even space out while you're reading something, it means you didn't understand the meaning of a particular word. And then you have to go and look up the word and self-indoctrinate. And of course, with thought control, you can't ask critical questions. You can't say, why is the leader sleeping with the followers? I thought he's supposed to be celibate. At all. You can't ask questions like that. And then the E of the BITE model is really about a combination of making you feel like you're chosen and you're special and you have unique knowledge to save the planet, where they may love bomb you and just effusive praise. Oh, you're so special. You're so wonderful. We love you. But once you're in the cult, there's so much manipulation of guilt and fear and fear of shunning, especially if you're born in a group and you're told that your family and friends will never be able to talk to you or relate to you if you leave the group. It's a horrible form of control. And the universal mind control technique is phobia indoctrination. The installation of irrational fears that terrible things will happen to you if you leave the group. So as someone who maybe has an elevator phobia, is afraid to get in an elevator, they can't imagine getting in an elevator, riding safely and comfortably. Someone in a mind control cult or relationship that's mind control, they can't imagine leaving the group or leaving the person and being happy and fulfilled. And at the point that they can start to imagine it, the phobia is getting neutralized. And I have a whole 3-step phobia intervention, and this goes back to the question about how to help a loved one who's involved with a cult. This is my book, Freedom of Mind, which focuses on techniques of how to help someone who's in a mind control cult. And I have a whole chapter on how to undo phobia programming, as phobias are one of the most powerful universal mind control techniques. So control of behavior, control of information, control of thinking, and control of emotions to make up the cult identity that's dependent and obedient on the leadership. And typically the structure is the top leader is the Messiah, the avatar, the perfect master, the prophet, the guru, who knows everything, trust me, I got it. And then going down the pyramid, there are different levels of understanding, of knowing what the doctrine is. A lot of times, one side doesn't even know what the other side is doing. The sarin gas cult, Om Shinrikyo, had a small number of people who actually were involved with the manufacture of the sarin gas and who actually did the terrorist act. The vast number of people were what I call fringe members, totally indoctrinated, but not living in the center. They had outside jobs and gave their money to the cult. So, and people will often say to me, Tom Cruise, he's in Scientology. How could he be in a mind control cult? And I point out that there's a difference between public Scientologists and people who are on staff versus people who are in the Sea Org, where they have to sign a billion-year contract and work for $15 a week for the organization. So there really are major differences in people's involvements within mind control cults. And there are many different types of destructive cults. I would imagine some of you out there were thinking that all destructive cults that I would talk about are religious or spiritual, and not really thinking about political dictatorships or political cults or institutional abuse or pseudo-therapeutic or pseudo-educational cults or commercial cults like multi-level marketing or even labor and sex trafficking and pimps. But those also are mind control groups. And you can use the same bite model and the same influence continuum to assess that. So here's a few examples of religious or spiritual cults. These groups focus on religious or spiritual dogma. I apologize, but we just had a major nor'easter. And so my driveway, I think, is getting cleared of 8 or 10 inches of snow right now. So I hope that's not interrupting anybody being able to hear me. So in religious cults, on the left, I talk about Watchtower of the Jehovah's Witnesses. The fellow in the middle is in jail. He's the prophet, quote unquote, of the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints cult group that's out west in Utah and in Arizona. There was a recent documentary called Holy Hell about a cult called Buddha Field, and the leader who basically was using hypnosis on his followers and abusing them sexually, as well as emotionally, psychologically, and financially. Some political cults, of course, ISIS or Daesh is in the news literally every day. They are a mind control cult using religion. I call them a political cult, not a religious cult, because they want to take over the world and they want to impose their version of Sharia law on everybody else. Joseph Kony, an African cult leader, would go into villages and kidnap children and kill their parents and recruit them to be child soldiers. Of course, the right picture is the head of North Korea. Any questions as I'm going through all of these?
Yes, we have a couple of questions that came in.
Great.
A couple of them are asking about if you'll be covering controlling family members. One person writes in that they were married to a narcissist at 19. Now at age 40, they have an 18-year-old son, who is under their ex-husband's control and has very little access to this person, and they're wondering if you're going to be covering controlling family members.
So, the scope in depth to cover that, I will not. I'm going to mention some of the characteristics, but I'm glad to receive the question. So, typically narcissist personality disorder, people who have no conscience, no empathy, everything's about making them look good and feel good, and so people are objects to be manipulated in order to serve them. And it's interesting that most destructive cult leaders seem to fit those same characteristics and such as an individual. It sounds from the question like there was what's known as parental alienation, where the parents separate and then the parent indoctrinates or brainwashes the child to have bad thoughts and feelings against their other parents, and which leads to an estrangement. And so that's a whole nother version or another area of mind control cult that I work with in terms of how to help empower the person who's estranged to build a team of other family members, friends, other ex-members who've been also similarly estranged from their parents, but then woke up and understood the patterns that were being used, and to figure out how to help the child, sometimes is now an adult. So that's what I'm going to say at this moment with the limited amount of time that we have about that. And was there a question, Joanne, before that?
Yes, there are two other questions.
Okay.
One is objectivism a mind control cult?
Objectivism, not sure how to, I can't answer that. And in general, what I don't do is say this group is a cult or it's not, but I ask people to look at the behaviors, the bite model, and the continuum, and do their research and see whether or not it fits the paradigm or not. So I honestly don't know if objectivism has a particular founder or leader and what the recruitment is, and etc. So sorry about that.
Okay. Another is they want to know if there is a link between people on the spectrum and cults.
Yeah, we're going to get to some slides very shortly about that. And anything else before I go on?
No, that's all for right now.
Great. So this slide, I talk about commercial cults. This image on the left is actually a book that was written and published by a pimp, and the Pimping Ken, and it's how to brainwash people to be your sex slave. It's very, very upsetting. And it's really a horrendous abuse. I can also tell you that with three other people, three survivors of sex trafficking, we've developed a curriculum, a first of its kind curriculum called Ending the Game. The website is endingthegame.com. A 10-session course to help people who were trafficked to understand mind control techniques that pimps use to empower and enslave people, change their name, change their clothing, change their language. In the case of pimps, they'll often use threats and beatings and drugs and threaten to kill your family and other types of extreme coercion. That's how millions of people, unfortunately, around the world are victims of trafficking. And then the other thing I want to comment about commercial cults, so this slide is Herbalife. I could have used Amway. I could have used any number of hundreds of groups. They're pyramid schemes where they make these deceptive come-on recruitment things that you can make millions of dollars in part-time effort, selling vitamins or selling water or selling something, but it's actually recruiting people. And the idea there, people are told, is that you'll get a percentage of everything that the people that you bring in sell. But it's really a fraud, and except for a very tiny percentage of people at the very top of the pyramid, everybody loses money. But it functions like a destructive cult in that they program the new independent salesperson to listen to tapes, read books, attend conferences to become a great salesperson. But a lot of it is utilizing hypnosis and NLP and mind control that gets people to believe that the problem is in them if they're not making the $1 million. I highly recommend Pyramid Scheme Alert as a website. We're actually working on a blog for freedomofmind.com about a new movie that's coming out about multi-level marketing. I think it's called Betting on Zero. So then I want to just talk for a minute about pseudotherapy cults, larger awareness, group awareness trainings. These can be anything from live-in psychology cults where everything is controlled. Center of Feeling Therapy, the Sullivanians come to mind with this category. Then there are groups like Landmark Forum, LifeSpring Insight trainings, where they get people together for a weekend or for a series of days, and they do all kinds of BITE, behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control, to take people over and indoctrinate them. And one of the more pernicious beliefs that are installed in some of the large group training programs is the idea that you are God and you create your own reality. So there's no science, there's no objective reality, but it's all a manifestation of your mind. And they also say that there's no such thing as a victim. So that if you were raped, you are made to think, why did I need to create this experience for myself to be raped? As opposed to, I was taken advantage of by somebody who did something to me that I didn't want them to do. So it's a very convoluted belief system that short circuits normal, rational, critical thinking. I can also tell you I've worked with some people who went into therapy, and 20 years later they're still with that therapist and they're not any better. And as a therapist, I say the purpose of therapy is to get out of therapy and to be functional and to live your life and to be able to do meaningful work and have meaningful relationships and make a difference. And as opposed to unethical therapists who might sleep with their clients or, just bilk them for huge amounts of money or isolate them from family or friends. That's a horrible thing. A few slides about Scientology. The middle top is L. Ron Hubbard, who is a science fiction writer. On the left is Tom Cruise. We added the Narcanon slide to the right. They are recruiting people, saying they can help people get off of drugs. They're advertised heavily, but their solution for getting off of drugs is to basically become an addict in Scientology, to have that identity take over yours. And the bottom slide on the left is from a Leah Remini show, part 2, that I was asked to be on. Lawrence Wright, who wrote the book Going Clear and did the HBO documentary Going Clear, is next to me. Mike Rinder was in Scientology for 46 years. He was the former number 3 man of the group. Leah Remini, who was in it for 35 years, who is a celebrity from TV. And Ray Jeffrey, who is an attorney who helps former members of cults and helps to litigate against cults. The next slide is about institutional abuse, boot camp cults, troubled teen industry. Some of these are religious compounds to get people who are gay to become straight again, or groups that where people are sent where they have they smoke pot or they have a drug problem and they're going to get straight, and their parents are manipulated and controlled, deceived, indoctrinated to subject their children to this. And the Family Foundation School on the right is closed down, but they would basically characterize all problems as an alcohol drug problem. So if you are diagnosed as Asperger's and you go there, you're told that's a false diagnosis. You just need to do the 12 steps and follow them, and they're going to help to get you straight. And here's my slide about individuals who are predators. This creepy person is now in jail. He was a divorce attorney, had to give up his license recently. He was using hypnosis on his female clients and raping them and then giving them amnesia to it. And this is a whole nother area of destructive mind control that is something that I've researched and have been helping people with. But regular non-attorney predators, cult leaders, they have these same characteristics that I mentioned before. And someone was asking about an ex-spouse, I guess, an ex-husband or wife. And very narcissistic, no conscience, likes to manipulate other people, uses deception and exploitation, super charismatic, flattering, but the bottom line is go back to the bite model. Are they cutting you off from your family and friends, no matter what the story is? If the result is don't talk to critics, don't talk to ex-members, don't read critical literature, follow what they say, that where they threaten you or they make you feel guilty if you're not loyal to them. Warning, warning, warning. There are battered shelters if you're being physically abused or sexually abused. There's a website by a friend of mine who's a survivor herself of a narcissist. She has a website called Love Fraud. She's written a number of books on the subject. Her name is Donna Anderson. And then I just want to, we're getting towards 8 o'clock. Get through these slides, and then we'll continue to do some more questions and answers. But this is a very famous hierarchy of needs, Abraham Maslow, and it's very useful in terms of understanding how a predator or a cult person may try to enter into and manipulate and control someone. So if someone is kicked out of their house, for example, they have a fight with their parents, so they need food, they need shelter. So it'd be very easy for a pimp to pick them up and give them food and shelter before they start working on them to become an object for them and one of their employees. So it's just an interesting slide to consider. I'm sure you can look it up on the internet, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I also want to talk about situational vulnerabilities, and for parents and caretakers, people are especially vulnerable to mind controllers or undue influence cults when their parents are recently separated or divorced, or if they are in a very chaotic, disorganized home life with his alcohol, with his domestic violence, end of a relationship, death of a loved one, illness, change of or loss of job, or graduation, or moving to a new city, state, or country. For any human being, I've yet to meet the perfect family, or I've yet to meet anyone who didn't have a loss of a relative, or an illness, or knowing someone who has an illness, or graduation, or moving to a city, state, or country. And naturally, if you come from a war-torn country and you've had PTSD and traumatic experiences, you're going to be extremely vulnerable. But I can also point to the very beginning of the slide that there are some people who are very wanting to approval and wanting to please people. And there are other people who are very interested in magical thinking. They read a lot of books, fiction books that invoke a lot of magical thinking. And then there's a genetic component. Some people are what we call high hypnotizable. They have a very good ability to concentrate. They have a vivid imagination. And the thing is that's a good thing, but when you're in that state, your critical analytic faculties are offline, and it makes that person more susceptible to control. So, for example, in Scientology, they have a course called the Communications Course, but in essence, they're teaching people how to go into hypnotic trance and to become obedient. And that's a whole nother presentation about techniques of hypnosis. Any excessive amounts of hypnosis, meditation, altered states of consciousness activities can also render someone potentially more vulnerable if they don't understand what I presented in this program tonight. For example, if they don't have a frame for being able to analyze destructive undue influence. Learning challenges, including Asperger's, drug or alcohol issues, unresolved sexual identity or orientation, or rape or molestation, is also going to make people more personally vulnerable. Of course, if you're lonely and looking for love, and some attractive person comes into your life and says you're the love of their life, you're going to be very susceptible to that. So now we get to the slides about Asperger's. I met with Tony Atwood when he was doing the last one-day conference for AANE at MIT, and he really encouraged me to do this webinar and talked about his concerns, especially for people who are Asperger's, to be recruited into terrorist-type groups, because there's a certain attractiveness with the love bombing, instant friendship, instant meaning. God has a plan for you. And the last sentence of this slide is just that it can be very confusing for family members and friends when they see someone who's on the spectrum, and all of a sudden they say that they're happy for the first time, or they've made friends for the first time, or now they know the purpose of their life for the first time, and is a real desire not to want to take away that happiness or interfere because the person is so enthused. But warning, because this is a horrible, non-healthy place for people. I have recently been in contact with a man who is involved with a Bible cult, the International Churches of Christ, for 24 years, and he was undiagnosed as Asperger's and he read my book, and he reached out to me and such. And again, his family didn't, took his word for it when he said he was happy, and his family didn't understand that the cult had programmed him never to tell the outside world anything bad about his experiences. So he didn't tell his family about breaking sessions. He didn't tell anyone about the extreme amount of abuse, loneliness, phobia programming, etc. So it took him a really long time to wake up, but he finally did, which is the good news. Another person who is an ASPE was involved with Scientology for over 20 years and gave over $200,000 to it. And the appeal of you can be on the bridge to total freedom, and you just need to do each one of these courses and pass each level, and then you're going to gain these superhuman powers to move objects with your mind and control the weather, etc. was very appealing to him, and it took him over 20 years to wake up and get out of that group. So this is an AANE slide, thanks to Michelle, who suggested that I use it. And on the bottom is just the typical problem people have with Asperger's of sensory regulation and regulation of their emotions and anxiety, and as well as attentiveness and such. And a group that comes in and says, we can help you be reborn and make you perfect, or make you so much more functional, and we can give you, the black and white perfect ideology and tell you exactly how you should organize your day, but where there's this hidden agenda, you don't realize that it's really about dependency and obedience on the leader, to give over your money, to give over your time, to help recruit, to use all your social skills to help them. And it really is a trap where, for an ASPE, they think that they're making friends, but they don't understand that these people have an agenda to recruit them, and as soon as they get in, they're going to put their attention on other people. They don't understand that there are these different layers and up the pyramid. They don't understand that they're going to be cut off from family, friends, and any other points of view and any other information, and that these irrational fears are going to be programmed into them. So it's really, really horrible. We're at 8 o'clock, and I just have a couple more slides. So how to protect your loved ones if you're a parent, if you have siblings. You want to stay in good relationship with them and have good communication. And you want to tell them that if some new person is legitimate, they'll stand up to investigation and scrutiny. And that includes individuals as well as organizations. But be very careful, because the bigger cults, the more sophisticated cults, manipulate the search engines and hide critical information about people, etc. If they're making new friends, going to new group meetings, ask them if you can come along. You'd like to learn too. Teach your loved one critical thinking skills. Show them the BITE model. Show them the continuum. Help them learn how to be assertive and exert healthy boundaries. What you don't want to do, and some people get so frustrated because they try to argue their loved one out of the cult or out of the mind control relationship, they make threats or ultimatums. If you don't break up with him, then you're not my son anymore, or my daughter, and I'm going to write you out of the will, or whatever. Don't do anything that's all or nothing, because you'll push them deeper under the control of the manipulator or the cult. And, I've written books on the subject. I have over 100 free videos that are on my YouTube as well as on my on my website, freedomofmind.com. And then how to protect yourself, and this is for neurotypicals and neuroatypicals. You have to learn how to evaluate information, think analytically, know the difference between a fact and a belief. Study about undue influence. Don't listen to the words, but look at the deeds, look at the actual behaviors. Be careful about sharing a lot of personal, detailed information with new people, and be very careful not to put your profile on Facebook or whatever to be public, because mind controllers, if they know details about a person, they can easily pretend that they're psychic and they can read your mind, or, act in a way that they know that you're going to like them and identify with them and be more easily influenced by them. So be extremely careful what you disclose about yourself. If somebody's putting a very high pressure, like you need to come this weekend, or this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, take a step back, because if it's legitimate, it will be there next week. And if anyone's doing very heavy pressure, get angry, stand up to them and say no. And judge the actual accomplishments of a group. If a group's been around for 40 years and they say that they're helping the poor and they're not a nonprofit and they don't have a lot of members, what have they been doing for 40 years? There's a political group here in Boston that is recruiting people and money, and it's a cult group, and it's really, really sad. So research the leader, research the history, use keywords in Google like scam, cult, brainwashing, and always evaluate if there is negative information about a person or a group, who is the source or where is the source of negativity coming from. Because, for example, I've been doing this work for 40 years. I've had many different cults put up many different types of web pages criticizing me and saying I'm a bad person and I'm an anti-religious bigot, et cetera, So you really have to be careful to evaluate on a case-by-case basis the information. And does it stand up to scrutiny? And if you're not sure, ask. If there's some critical information you're not sure is it legitimate or not, you can test that out. And Wikipedia is unfortunately taken over by cult recruiters and members trying to do puff pieces on their groups. So be very, very careful about that. And with that, this is my last slide. So these are my two books, Combating Cult Mind Control. That's kind of the foundational book. It tells my story of being in the Moonies, and it's an overview of how to protect, rescue, and recover. And then the Freedom of Mind book is the more detailed book about my strategic interactive approach of how to develop an ethical influence campaign to help a friend or a loved one start to step back and reality test. And with that, Joanne, I'm open to more questions and answers if anyone has anything they'd like to ask me.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, this has been wonderful. And we do have a couple of questions, and I invite the audience to type in their questions or comments as well. So this question tonight is about the current political system. And they're wondering, how is what you talk about tonight different from the narcissism that we're seeing right now with President Trump?
Thank you for the question. So, yes, it's kind of obvious, and it's particularly problematic for me as someone who was in a cult and left in 1976 and has been on hundreds of TV shows and done lectures and become a mental health professional, to now be faced with the most powerful person on earth is displaying all the stereotypical traits of a cult leader. and I actually wrote a blog with that title on the Freedom of Mind site, which you can read, that has the continuum and the qualities. So it's very, very frightening. It's very upsetting. There are a lot of very wonderful people who, in my opinion, have been conned, who've accepted the lies, and who have been indoctrinated with this black and white, us versus them scenario. We need to be vigilant. We need to have a strong, independent press. And information control is one of the major elements of a dictatorship or of a cult. They don't want anyone to ask hard questions. They want to deflect it. They want to create fake news stories to distract. And so what I am trying to do is raise international attention on the BITE model and the continuum, and encourage people to look at Charlie Manson, Jim Jones, look at other cult leaders, look at their behaviors, and then look at Donald Trump and work very hard to protect our liberties, to lobby our lawmakers, and to be very, very active, because they have a lot of money that they're using to indoctrinate people to vote against their own best interests. So that's the short answer.
Thank you. Another question is there such a thing as legitimate altered states of consciousness?
So absolutely, there are legitimate altered states of consciousness. I am a Jewish member of my temple in Brookline. I love to pray. I love to chant. I love to meditate. They're all altered states of consciousness. I like to sing. I like to dance. I do yoga. Those are all altered states of consciousness activities. I love to scuba dive, and that's an altered state of consciousness. So the issue really is who's in control of my mind. And my work says you should be in control of your own mind, not to somebody else telling you what reality is. And so for me, a healthy frame of mind includes critical thinking, intuition, and emotions, your heart and your gut, as well as a good family and support system of friends to reality test anything.
Okay. Another question talks about bigger cults, and they're using Scientology as an example, and they're wondering, do bigger cults use different names of companies to promote their views and to suck people in?
Oh, great question. So the answer is emphatically yes. I have a list of something like 70 pages, single-spaced, of my former cult, and all the names of different entities, businesses, political entities, media entities, recruiting entities, religious entities. And that's partly why I didn't spend much time talking about names of groups, because there are so many different names, and a new name can be invented in 10 seconds. So the issue is really, who is the leader? What is the history? What is the organizational structure? And is it on the ethical side of influence or the unethical side of influence? And that's the most important takeaway message.
Okay. Another person is wondering, and this is about you and your practice. They're wondering if you're accepting clients, and do you teach ways to break out of the programmed mindset?
So my practice is in Newton. I'm actually very close to AANE. I'm at the stage of my career, I'm 62 years old, where I'm really interested in training other professionals to kind of take over for me, I have a man in Illinois who was raised in the Jehovah's Witnesses, who's a mental health professional, who's kind of my mentee. I have other people that I really want to teach, etc. I have a very limited amount of time in terms of taking new clients. So the answer is yes, I do take new clients. I'm pretty expensive. I do have a sliding scale, but I also need to pay for all my other operations, trying to get the word out, etc. Like right now, I'm wanting to do an audio version of Combating Cult Mind Control and looking at $10,000 to do that. But the answer is yes. I help families rescue a loved one who's involved. I do consultations, paid consultations with other mental health professionals. I will do training, and I do help former members. I just did a 3-day intervention with a woman who was in Dan Yoga, a Korean cult. Now they call themselves Body and Healing. They're in Coolidge Corner and Arlington and a few other places locally. It's a Korean cult. So I basically was doing 6-hour days, 3 hours in the morning, hour and a half lunch, and 3 hours in the afternoon. And I find this kind of intensive work is what's needed to, she was involved for over 7 years with the cult to help her to undo a lot of the programming that was done with her.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, can you recommend some readings for a late teenager who's being controlled by their parent?
Is this related to the parental alienation question, or is this just any late teen? Because I highly recommend Combating Cult Mind Control, but it may be that the book needs to be recommended by someone other than the estranged parent. Maybe it needs to come from an aunt, an uncle, a neighbor, or something, and they should always read it first before just handing it to them and engage the person in a series of conversations. The Leah Remini show that I was on is on demand on AANE Network, and that's a good thing to ask someone to watch first. And then if they get curious and want to learn more about Scientology and then about my work, then you can maybe offer this book to them. It's not that complicated. It's not written for super brains. It's meant to be read for people 8th grade or so.
Okay. I'm just going through a few more of the other questions.
Sure.
One person here is talking about how it's easy to sometimes lose the chance to learn critical life skill sets. And they're wondering if this is a factor that cults look for when recruiting people or people who are having a difficult time with basic skills.
So my experience with cult recruiters is, like I was recruited at 19 at Queens College. Within a few weeks, I was told to drop out of Queens College and then sent back to set up a student club at Queens College in order to access other college students. So it really comes down to whoever is recruited is going to start to look at their family, friends, and spheres of influence. And they pretty much will try to recruit anybody, especially if they're attractive, if they have a special skill, if they have money, or their family has money. They're going to make a greater effort to go after that particular person. What I found is that the bigger cults, if you don't have any money and you're not really able to devote long hours of free labor for them, or you're not really able to recruit new people, they're going to tend to not bother with you.
Okay. So you have to be able to give them something in return, it sounds like.
Right.
Okay. So another question is, does a cult need a leadership structure, or can it simply be a loose social gathering of like-minded people?
Good question. So there are a lot of ideological cults that don't have a charismatic leader or founder, but they have an ideology that is very black and white, us versus them, good versus evil, and that where people are not encouraged to have dissenting points of view or ask critical questions or insist that you only look at certain websites or certain YouTubes. And you want to be very suspicious of any group that is so monolithic that they don't encourage you to look at things from other points of view. So, for example, as much as I am critical of Fox News and talk radio, and I'm a listener of NPR and read the New York Times, I push myself to look at that material and listen to stories because I want to understand how they're framing information. And it's amazing if you don't have a commitment to truth and to facts, how you can spin things and confuse people. And I should add, the fastest way to mind control someone is to confuse them. And a very easy technique to confuse someone is to repeat a lie over and over, believably, or to say, mistruths about the past. Well, I never said that. I never did that. Even though there's a video of you doing that or of you saying that, but you deny that. For an average person, it's confusing. Why is this person lying? Until you step back and realize that this is characteristic of narcissistic psychopaths, because they lie in order to manipulate whoever's in the audience for that particular occasion.
Okay. This question, I'm not certain I'm going to say it correctly, so I'm going to ask the audience member to type in if it's something different. They want to know how cults might be connected with family dysfunction. So, for example, an adult child is behaving like an alcoholic, and they're wondering what the best way to learn to be proactive is rather than getting caught up in the fear.
Mm-hmm. So, essentially, developmentally, we do the best we can as parents or as children, and our parents are role models. And we know on the continuum that healthy parenting, if you're on the left side, you really want to do developmentally appropriate parenting strategies. So for an infant, you have to make all the decisions for them. You have to diaper them and choose what they eat, etc. But as they get older, you want to give them challenges. You want them to take risks. You want them to learn consequences of their own behavior. You want to teach them so that the goal ultimately is to become more individuated and more functional independently. Now, I understand that people on the spectrum, there's a wide range of folks, and some people will never be fully independent. And so it's a matter of each person having the best environment possible, the best teachers and therapists, and family members doing the most helpful thing to help them reach their maximum potential. As far as if you're raised in a family and your father's an alcoholic and gives the kid, alcohol when they're very, very young, it's not only modeling social influence drinking alcohol, but it's also affecting their brain, the child's brain, because there's now evidence that the younger a child starts drinking, the more likely they're going to have an alcoholism problem. What's fascinating for me in all my years of doing therapy is the neuroscience that's now available that demonstrates the neuroplasticity and the neurogenesis capabilities of people, where we can literally recreate our brain cells to a large extent based on healthy patterning versus unhealthy patterning. So some of my clients were born in cults and were horribly abused sexually and emotionally, corporal punishments, etc. But they're free, and with the right tools, they can learn to reparent themselves. They can learn to create healthy environment for themselves so that they can go on and live very, very fulfilled, full lives.
Okay.
I hope I answered the question.
If the viewer wants any more information, we'll ask them to type into it. And so at this moment we have one remaining question, and that is, and this is talking about teaching perspective taking and social skills to people with ASD. And the question is, if we teach them social skills by learning cause and effect, how can we teach them to know what's going on and how to stick up for themselves?
I think that's a whole nother workshop / webinar. I look forward to working with Michelle and other people at AANE to take this body of work that I've been doing for these decades and to customize it to fit the unique population that's served by AANE. I'm a big fan of scripts and role modeling and video reenactments of demonstrating healthy choices and healthy behaviors and unhealthy patterns and unhealthy behaviors, and repetition and learning, and then ultimately asking people to do the role plays and rehearse, being able to say, no, I'm not interested, thank you anyway. I want to point out that the woman that I helped 23 years ago, who was referred to me by Dr. Rosen, was involved with the Boston Church of Christ. One of the really interesting things that I learned early with her was that she really had a hard time understanding that the cult members weren't her friends. And she liked me and she respected me, but she also believed them when they say that they were her true friends. And at the point that I told her, well, if you tell them that you like me and you're talking to me, and the author of Combating Cult Mind Control, unfortunately, they'll not want to be your friend anymore unless you cut off contact with me. And she said, oh no, they would never do that. And I said, yeah, but that's what they'd be ordered to do. And that wound up playing a vital role in her realizing that they weren't real friends.
Okay. That's a great point. All right, we don't have any more questions at the moment. Steve, thank you so much for this webinar. It's been excellent. I think the discussion has been very, very helpful, and I'm hoping that we can schedule another webinar for the future.
Yeah, thanks so much
on some of these topics.
Something. And my guess is that there are really many, many people all over the world who have loved ones who are on the spectrum that are involved with destructive cults of all types, and they just don't realize it. So my hope is to start a conversation where people are talking with each other about this and doing their research and finding former members and engaging in processes to help liberate them. So thanks again for the opportunity, Joanne. You've been great.
You're welcome, and thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night. Take care.